Well, welcome everyone to the ITRC training session on building community-based resilience, mental wellness and resilience. I want to welcome all of you from the US, Canada, and different parts of the EU and some other countries that are involved at whatever time it is for you. Before we get going, I want to thank again our co-sponsors that you can see there, especially the American Public Health Association, for offering all of the continuing education credits, and to the Trauma Resource Institute and to Keisha Lindor especially, who's behind the scenes here. Actually, not so behind the scenes. She's actually making this all work, which we really appreciate. Today, we're going to really start focusing on some difficult issues that are really vital to work in community groups, helping people in different parts of the community, different populations, different sectors build their mental wellness and resilience. And that is to become aware of our racial, cultural, ethnic, and other biases, how that affects our behavior, how it affects others, and how it affects the ability of a local resilience group to function well. And with me today to make this presentation is Kevin McLeod, that's still spelled wrong, with the Trauma Resource Institute. And we'll hear from Kevin in a second. I sat through one of his presentations with the ITRC steering committee a while back, and it's really great. I think you'll really find this very, very useful. Before we get going, let's just center ourselves a little bit and presence ourselves with a resilience pause. And if you would, just sort of take a moment to settle in and just notice your breath as it enters your body, fills your lungs and your abdomen, and leaves your body. And your lungs and abdomen contract, and just sort of notice the breath as it comes into your body and leaves the body with no judgments, without trying to change anything. There's no right or wrong way to breathe. Just notice your breath for a few breaths. And if you're willing, just sort of notice if there's any changes that you are aware of in your body or in your mind, as you just take a few moments to become more present. Well, thank you for that. If there's anything you want to share in chat, please feel free to do that. I just want to go through a couple of reminders that and sort of set the table for Kevin to jump in here. But what we're focusing on in this training program is the bottom and side of the pyramid, where we have the greatest impact. And that is moving from a reactive approach that treats symptoms, individual symptoms, or provides assistance, direct scaled social service programs for people who need help, to really trying to create systems change that starts with a change in our own mindset, our own mental models, our beliefs, our core assumptions, et cetera, about the causes and the solutions to mental health and psychosocial problems. And that is to really address these issues, we really need to focus on community-based, culturally grounded, population level resilience building initiatives. And why do we focus on our mental models and systems change rather than technical aspects of doing this kind of work? And it's because when individuals and groups are traumatized or severely stressed, communities break apart. And we're seeing that all over the world. And the programs that we run to try to address this generally only treat symptoms of the problems, not the problems themselves. And the policies we adopt, that they fail. But when people become more resilient, they're better equipped to see reality much more clearly, and therefore to transform their mindset, their core assumptions and beliefs, and innovate and solve very complex challenges that we're facing today and will increasingly face. But that said, focusing only on the individual, building individual resilience, that's the starting point. But focusing only on that helps only that person address their immediate personal experiences. When lots of people in our neighborhoods and communities become more resilient, we become more resilient together, and we avoid the chances or the likelihood that any one individual or group can undermine the resilience of everyone else. So that's really one of the keys that we're working at. So why do we work at the community level? The trauma scene, as I've been calling it, this era we're entering of ongoing traumas of very kinds and toxic stresses, is really disrupting the ecological, social, economic, health, and many other systems that are essential for all of us. And effective responses require very new forms of thinking and population level or collective level resilience. And building collective resilience requires working at the community level. And the greatest power for doing this comes when we do this, when we try to build collective resilience intentionally before people have experienced so many adversities that they can't really deal with anything except trying to survive. So the earlier we get out in front of this, the better. And our job is really to help everyone develop what you could call a resilience toolkit. And building collective resilience, population level resilience requires that we purposefully help everyone enhance their ability to calm their mind, body, and emotions. We call this presencing. You can call it whatever you want. It's self-regulation skills. And then engage in activities that offer new sources of meaning, direction, and hope. We call it purposing skills. It's adversity-based growth skills. You can call it whatever you want. And doing this really requires that a resilience coordinating council help everyone develop their own toolkit. It's a unique toolkit. It's not one standard one of age and culturally appropriate information, skills, tools, and methods that people can use intentionally when things get tough. And you all on the line can help everyone build their own resilience toolkits in your community. And we hope you will do that. So let's take one more resilience pause and just think about your capacity for building resilience within yourself. What helps you become more resilient? What helps you calm your mind, body, and emotions when you're distressed? And what helps you find meaning, purpose, and hope when things are tough? Just do a little thinking about that. And as you do that, just try to follow your breath in and out again, just without changing anything, without any expectations. What helps you become more resilient? What helps you calm your mind, body, and emotions? And what helps you find meaning, purpose, and hope in distressing situations? And we're going to circle back to these questions today in different forms. Just wanted to sort of set the table with that. And if it's, again, is anything you want to share in chat, please do. And one of the most important tools in the resilience toolkit is the capacity to become aware of and manage our own racial, ethnic, and cultural biases and other kinds of biases. This is vital when you work in with a diverse group of people trying to help build population level or collective mental wellness and resilience. And it is a great honor today to introduce Kevin MacLeod of the Trauma Resource Institute, who's going to help you look at these issues. And Kevin, thank you very much for joining us, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob. And now I will get ready to share my screen, and we're going to hope everything goes okay. No, it will. All right. Can everyone see the screen? Thank you. Thank you. Before getting started, and today's conversation is about going from otherness to us, and we want to awaken from the illusion of separateness and embody connection, for this climate emergency, or just for, building community resilience all together. But before I go on, I just want to tell you an interesting conversation that I had this past week with TRI CEO, Michael Sapp. Mike is a psychologist by trade, and he's also the CEO of the Trauma Resource Institute. And we were just talking about the community resiliency model. And we were talking about the skills and how important they are, and how we talk to so many people after dealing with devastating life issues, dealing with grief and loss, or just interpersonal issues with family members or friends, or other devastating experiences. And then we sat back for a moment and we thought about it in terms of work around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we came to the agreement that although these skills are so great, and although people seek out counseling and they go see therapists and psychologists and clinicians for a variety of reasons, one of the hardest things still to talk about is race, racism, issues on equity, things like that. People will go and talk about a myriad of other issues, dire circumstances, etc. But when it comes to matters of race, that's how difficult those things are to talk about when the professionals in the field still, have scarce conversations, about this subject matter. And so what I want to do today is to start this conversation with this group. And wherever you are on your continuum of preparedness to be able to engage on these issues, that's okay. We're for some, this may be a starting point. For others, you may be all the way on the other end of the continuum or the spectrum, and that's fine. Want to engage everyone, and ultimately we want to go from otherness to us. And we'll talk about some different things that we can consider throughout this journey. And also today is a conversation. I don't know if I'll be able to monitor the chat that well while I'm presenting, but Keisha can let me know if there are specific questions that arise from the conversation, or feel free to maybe come off mute if you have a question or something to that effect. So here, the vision of the Trauma Resource Institute and ITRC, what we want is a world where people of all religions, races, ages, abilities, sexual orientation, and gender identification were equally respected, included, and welcomed. I love that all of those are included, because these identity markers that I've just mentioned, and there are many more, those are sometimes the things that are used to other people. When we talk about this process of othering, that separateness, that ability for us as human beings to turn away from someone else's struggle and their pain, whatever enables us to do that, that othering is the word we've given it. So here we want to build community-based, population level, culturally grounded mental wellness and resilience for the climate emergency. And so we acknowledge that this dialogue about equity, diversity, and inclusion is a dialogue for all. So once again, going back to that conversation I was having with Tri's CEO this week, and thinking about how much this dialogue is not taking place. We hear about it, you know, uh, now and then, and especially since some of the events of 2020, George Floyd's murder marking a huge turning point. But these conversations are still not necessarily happening in, you know, the numbers that we would like them to in order to move the needle on some of the issues that we are facing. So with that being said, as we want to enter into communities and we want to have community-based, population level, culturally grounded wellness, what bridges do we need to build to get there? How do we get there? How do we engage with people as an us and not as if they are the other? And so this is vitally important because, left unaddressed, the climate generated accelerating disasters, things that happen. Texas was a huge example of just a disaster that got really out of proportion, and people that are normally impacted greatly impacted by this. The communities that have been othered were greatly impacted by that ecological disaster, just like many others. And so, we want to use these skills. We want to use this information so that we don't aggravate, existing issues and perpetuate this otherness that has, been longstanding in areas. We want to take steps as organizations and as people to, work for the collective, work for entire communities. And so this is different than normal conversations around um, marginalization or equity or race and racism and things of that nature, because we are going to get across that bridge, and we are going to use our presencing skills and our purposing skills in order to work across difference and have these conversations that are so difficult to have, while also, they're so difficult to have, but so much still needs to be done. And so this is vitally important because without enhanced awareness and great care, both community-based and mental wellness, resilience building efforts and actions to reduce emissions and adapt to climate impacts can aggravate existing and produce new forms of separation and otherness. So I just want to go back to the second line there: without enhanced awareness and great care. Today we're going to do some activities, and it's all about awareness. We're going to hopefully become aware of things that we have not been thinking about day in and day out, things that impact us, but then also listening to our counterparts that are on this call and, having an enhanced awareness about their experiences as well. And that's just a kind of microcosm demonstration of what we would like to see in community. How can you hear someone else's story and have that to drive empathy within you, to bring you closer, and then ultimately working on behalf of one another? So in preparing for the future, when we're thinking about community-based, population level, um, interventions or preventative methods, when preparing for the future, what groups are you engaging or not? And are there invisible groups or communities? And I'm just going to sit with that question for a moment. When preparing for the future, and whatever it is that you're doing, whatever specialty that you have, whatever skill set that you bring to the table or your organization brings, what groups are you engaging or not? And then are there invisible groups or communities? Are there communities that are not even being considered? If they've not been considered, What's the rationale around that? Ultimately, does it boil down to difference? Because we know working across difference is hard. Whatever that difference may be, whatever that label that is causing, that otherness to set in, to occur, what is that? How can you identify that? So some of the goals that we have with this work is to, we want to integrate mental wellness and resilience skills into the activities of daily living with respect to historical, ongoing, and cumulative acute traumas and relentless toxic stresses. It is not a secret that there are people and communities that are dealing with multiple issues. They are dealing with multiple forms of trauma. They're dealing with multiple forms of toxic stress. And Resma Menachem, he's a somatic experiencing practitioner and expert on matters of equity and racial trauma. He frames it like this: trauma without context in a person looks like personality. Trauma without context in a family looks like family relationships and family dynamics. Trauma without context in a community looks like culture. And so as you think about integrating wellness and resilience skills into the activities of daily living, with respect to the historical, ongoing, and cumulative acute traumas, like, people have a story to tell. People have life experiences that have impacted them and shaped them greatly. I am very excited to be able to talk about matters of equity, diversity, and inclusion in respect to trauma. And just knowing that these things are traumatic to people and impact them the same way other types of trauma does in their lives. But moving on from that goal, we want to gain self-awareness and skills for navigating activation caused by advantage and oppression. So as we go through this learning process, and that self-awareness bucket is getting filled, there may be some activation that occurs. There may be some dysregulation of the nervous system. This is hard work, very meaningful, very purposeful, very good work, but it's hard nonetheless. So just being aware that there may be activation that's caused by advantage and oppression. You'll hear me talk about some of the concepts in this presentation as a two-sided coin. On one side there is advantage, and on the other side there is oppression. And you can have both of those things, with the same person. But we just want to gain self-awareness around those, and just be ready, because we have skills. We have presencing skills. I use my wellness skills from the community resiliency model to keep myself in my resilient zone so that I can still navigate and do the work that needs to be done. Ultimately, we want to empower and strengthen voices and communities through resilient zone dialogue. One of the things that is a consistent theme throughout the presentations week to week is just the empowerment aspect and strengthening voices and communities. And empowering people and people being put into a position where they are the decision makers, they are the voices, they are determining what's helpful for them. Here, I love to talk about this slide. So what we want to do is this work is resiliency and trauma informed, and we want to create safer spaces for dialogue regarding our differences, honoring our lived experiences, and remembering what binds us as a world community. So as we talk about the climate emergency, it's a great example of something that affects everyone. Now, it may impact certain communities, and there's an environmental justice lens that needs to be applied in certain areas. But this is something that is going to impact everyone. And so remembering what binds us as a world community, just having that unified purpose can help us move toward the us. Also, with this, the core values of the Trauma Resource Institute, those speak to me, and I just love sharing them with people: service, social justice, dignity, respect, worth of every person, family, and community. So, as we think about these community based population level initiatives, and you think about that last value, worth of every person, family, and community, regardless to where you live, regardless to what side of town you are on, what part of the world you are in, everybody is worth it. And that's the us mentality that we hope to develop. Some of the things that I love to do when um, talking to people about issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion is to um, define words that are often used interchangeably and they shouldn't be. So here we've got inequality, equality, equity, and then ultimately we have justice. There's a couple of things that I want you to see with this slide. One of them is the difference between equality and equity, and then also what justice looks like. And this was taken from Tony Ruth's series on equity. And just starting with the inequality, you see that there are two people in the picture, and the tree is leaning to the left side. And on the left side of the tree are all the resources. And the right side has some resources, but the left side seems to have a lot of resources. So, what equality does in that situation is it gives both people the same tool in order for them to reach the resources. Although the tree is doing something different, which impacts the experience that both will have, equality gives people the same thing. So what does that look like when it comes to your organization? Is your organization built off of equality? Are you giving people the same thing regardless to where they are? Or are you meeting them where they are, as the equity picture in the bottom left displays? So equity is going to give people customized tools so that they can access the resources that they may need to access in order for them to thrive. You can tell that the ladder on the left is a little bit shorter than the ladder on the right, because it needs to be the person on the left. They can reach the resources, and there are still more resources on the left side of the tree. So equity, although great, although much better suited than equality in some situations, equity still does not change systems. And as Bob mentioned before, there's the policy implications. There is, there's the power dynamics that exists with systems and things of that nature. Equity gives people customized tools. Uh, it's a right size solution for each individual. But ultimately, you need to have some justice minded people that want to fix the tree, or they want to fix the system, or they want to fix the organization, or they want to fix the sector. And when you look at the justice picture, there are planks that are, forcing the tree to stand upright, and there are, ropes that are tying it down to the ground. Uh, and in the justice picture, both people have the same size ladder because the resources are pretty much spread out for them to reach them, at the same rate. So it doesn't matter which side of the tree that you're born on or which side of the tree that you live on. The tree has, the appropriate resources all around. So what does this look like in your community? If you were to take this picture and apply it to the programs or apply it to the organizations or the sectors where you are, would you find just pure inequality? Would you find equality where you need equity? And if you find equity, can you reach justice? What would it take to reach justice? So I'm just going to pause there and just ask you all just to notice, what do you notice as you look at this slide? Inequality, equality, equity, and justice. What do you notice on the inside? And I'll tell you what helps me not to get overwhelmed when it comes to this work is knowing that we can have equity, experiencing situations where folks are committed to reaching equity and also reaching justice. But if you notice a sensation that is distressing to you, I invite you to maybe put your feet on the floor and notice the connection between your feet and your floor, or notice the connection that your back may have against the back of your chair. I invite you to scan your body and just notice if there is a place that is less distressing. Now for the pop quiz. So as we leave today, will we be able to articulate the difference between equality and equity? That's your homework. Tell somebody what the difference is between equality and equity. Equality being giving an equal solution to people that may have different problems. Equity is that custom tool, that right size solution for each individual. And this is just a chart to articulate some of the thoughts from the previous slide. Equality being the state or quality of being equal. Equity is the quality of being fair and impartial, and justice is the state of or quality of being just. And I like to go down to the bottom right. Justice considers altering systems to meet the needs of people. And if our work can focus on the last two columns, if our work can focus on equity and justice, we are doing right by people. If we can consider their individual needs, treating each person according to their needs, and where this says person or people, you can also take it up a level and think community. What does it look like to treat each community according to their needs? What does it look like to consider the individual needs of communities? And this is where the storytelling elements come in, and they're very important. This is where the listening takes place, because while you're also hearing the needs of people and you're listening to their stories, you may also hear how they have overcome situations and circumstances time and time again. And so capitalizing on that resiliency, that strength that already exists in community is huge. You say, oh, wow, that happened. What helped you get through that? So equality and equity and justice are a huge part of this. And now we're going to transition into one of my favorite topics, intersectionality. And intersectionality has to do with the identities that people have and how the multiple identities that we have come together sometimes to compound the discrimination that we may experience. So Kimberly Crenshaw came up with this term in the late 80s in order to create a prism for people to look through and understand the complexities that happen when our identities come together and they point us toward or away from oppression. So that two-sided coin that I mentioned earlier, on one side there's advantage, and on the other side there's oppression. And so you see here some of the major identity markers that we have. You've got race, ability status, social class, gender. On the left, there's some more identifiers, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. Food, home, insecurity, age, religion, whether you're rural or urban, liberal, conservative, your immigration status, biological identification, gender identification, sexual orientation, your education level. Could be, the country that you're from. It could be many other identifiers that you may have. And some of these point you toward oppression and discrimination, and some of these point you toward advantage. And I love using this concept of intersectionality to bring forward how people are othered. These are things that we use to other people. These are things that we use to separate people. But these are also things that we can use to include people, to make sure no one has become invisible to us. These are things that we can do to move toward community or to form better understanding of communities. And so, once again, this term was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She wanted to emphasize the complexity of discrimination and oppression, and get people to understand that, oh no, it's not just race. It may be race and gender, or it may be race and ability status, or social class and gender, or any of these other things that are on the left side of the slide. I use this information for myself to make sure I'm not othering people. Because honestly, before, prior to me really diving in and doing work around equity, diversity, and inclusion, some of these things I didn't have to think about. I know that as a Black man in America, race is something that is always on my mind. But I also know that I show up as a man, and there's male privilege that I'm afforded in a lot of environments and circumstances. And so, looking at my own two-sided coin in my life, I know that there are times that there may be advantage, and there are other times that there may be discrimination and oppression. But what that does for me is that makes me more aware that if there are times that I need to leverage my advantage so that uh, patriarchy doesn't flourish, or sexism doesn't flourish, or racism doesn't flourish, then I'll do that. And so as you think about your major identity markers, which ones come to mind for you? And we're going to do an exercise in a moment. We're going to do an activity, and I'm going to have you to respond to some questions that I'm going to pose to the group. And the questions are going to be related to your identities. And then you'll sort of reflect on others' perception of your identities and your experiences with your identities. And Then we'll have some time, we'll have a breakout session where you can have some dialogue and share with a small group, some of the things, some of your responses to the questions. And I invite you to do this activity. You can share or not. If you want to just participate in the activity by listening, you are well within your right to do so. But this activity is about getting to know others' experiences and to have time to reflect on how we can have a very similar or we can have wildly different experiences rooted in our identities. But what this does is it moves this group toward us. Although a lot of you may be strangers, that it moves this group toward us. And so the next slide includes the questions. This is our identity signs activity. And I'm just going to read through them. And as I read through these questions, I'm going to pause a little bit between each one. But if you are able, go ahead and start thinking about or writing your answers down. And as we get into the small groups, Keisha's going to, well, actually, before we get into the small groups, Keisha's going to start posting these questions in the chat so that you'll have them with you when you are in your breakout groups. But the first question is, the part of my identity that I'm aware of on a daily basis is, what part of your identity are you most aware of on a daily basis? And the next question is, the part of my identity that I'm least aware of on a daily basis is. The third question is one of those loaded, difficult questions. The part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is. Following that, the part of my identity that I believe is the most misunderstood by others is. The next is the part of my identity that I feel is difficult to discuss with others who identify differently is. And lastly, the part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against is. So, in a moment, we're going to break you into groups of 4, I believe. And this is what I call a high trust activity. So, I thank you in advance for being willing to participate or not. If you would like to just sit and listen, that is perfectly fine. But I would like for you to at least consider these questions and your answers to them. If you would like to share, and if you're going to share and participate in the group, please do so. Just be mindful that, you know, respect is utmost here. And this activity is designed for you to have an awareness of the experiences of other people, designed for you to learn from others, similar to how we would learn from people in communities where we would go and serve. All right, Keisha, if you're ready, we can go ahead with the groups. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you all so much. So before we jump back into the presentation, just wanted to gather thoughts from a few of you. What was that activity like? And you should be able to come off mute, or I think you can raise your hand and then Keisha may be able to take you off mute. So anyone want to comment? Would anyone like to share? I see that was a great exercise. I wish we had more time. You know, for anytime you want to say something to a presenter, add that to the list. We wanted more time with your activity. No, thank you so much. I see Sri. I was fortunate to be in a wonderful breakout group. Thank you, Christine, Peter, and Tim. That is also very good. Tim, I see you have your hand raised.
Sure, just quickly, it was very interesting exercise for me in that I had trouble answering some of those questions going into the breakout room, and then just through the course of conversation and just hearing other people and their perspectives, there was a lot of new things that kind of generated like, oh my goodness, there is like the last one in particular, like the discrimination question. I was kind of like, okay, am I really discriminated against at all? But came away going, yeah, I guess there are things in certain settings that I would be discriminated at. So it was actually quite surprising to come up with that conclusion. And so, yeah, it was a wonderful process in the group.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, as you hit it on the head also, Tim, in that reflecting on some of these questions that we don't really ask ourselves every day, but then gaining that perspective, you know, from the answers, and then taking that perspective with us, you know, hopefully will help us to, you know, to navigate our world better, to interact better, to take this knowledge that we have, this self-awareness, and use it, you know, not only for our benefit, but to the benefit of others. I'm going to jump into the chat really quick, but then I'm also going to just ask other folks to share as well.
Ready to share, Kevin?
I'm sorry?
Rebecca is waiting to share.
Okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca McKenzie, and thank you for these questions. They were very powerful. Our group drew an interesting comparison between question 1 and question 6, and we were surprised at those connections. So our group also was very, I think, very, I use the word blessed, but I would like to thank all the members. They were very open and sharing, and that's really special for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rebecca. And you know, just noticing that, and that's something that I noticed myself, just the connection between question 1, which is the part of my identity that I'm most aware of on a daily basis is, and then question 6 being the part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against is, and how those two can be just connected a lot. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to share? We can take 1 or 2 more, and then I'll read the chat, and then I'll dive into a few more slides that I have. All right, I see Sri.
Yeah, you got it, Kevin. Yeah, I just wanted to share how I really enjoyed my group. We were processing several different things. And one of the facets I'd mentioned was just the questions about what parts of your identity do you suppress, or that's the way I interpreted the question, parts of your identity you suppress, or that you feel when you're working with other communities that you can't necessarily share because it somehow creates a barrier to being able to advocate efficiently. And so I had mentioned that I am actually an atheist agnostic, and I'm also a person of color and a queer woman of color. And so being able to advocate amongst communities for whom, religion has been such an essential part of surviving oppression, and how to honor, this very important part of my identity, and the grief that I have about, my African and Asian ancestors and their indigenous religions being oppressed by major world religions, while also trying to, honor the Black church or the Black mosque in the fight against oppression. I think those sort of little things are sometimes topics we don't necessarily discuss, or I notice I often just don't discuss this part of my identity at all, because it's easier for me to advocate more quote unquote more efficiently. And so I think just having to focus on this question. I've done several anti-racism trainings, and this has never been a question that has come up necessarily. But I think these are really salient questions to ask if you want to have true individual level self-care and individual level grief, while also being able to feel grief on a communal level and having communal level self-care. So I greatly appreciated these questions, and even being in our group to process them.
Thank you so much for that. This group, you all are, you're amazing. And in a selfish kind of way, I hope that I get to present to people like you all the time, because it is not always easy presenting stuff like this. And you all were very, very courageous in these questions. These, as Bob and I have mentioned several times on this call today, this is not easy work by any stretch, by any means. This is not easy work, but we can do it. And it is very necessary for us to go from otherness to us. If we're thinking future oriented and we're thinking about the movements that we're involved in, hard work is going to have to take place. And this is part of that hard work. And Sri, going back to your comment, just remember that, this particular presentation in this program that we're doing, it's about creating safer spaces for dialogue regarding our differences, and honoring our lived experiences, and remembering ultimately what binds us as a world community. But yes, we're going to have differences, and we can acknowledge those. And I want to honor those. I want to be able to honor people that have, different identities than I do, because those identities are very important to them. And as a person that wants to, facilitate this movement from otherness to us, that is what I have to commit to doing. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm just going to read a few in the chat, and then I'm going to get started because I could debrief that exercise with you all day. Mona says, wanted to hear all their stories. That is something that is amazing, because as we work across difference, as we work in communities that are not like ours, as we work with people that have different identity markers than we may have, wanting to hear their stories is a huge part of that. Rachel says, it was vulnerable sharing so deeply with new to me people. And thank you so much, Rachel, for being a part of that. And that is, that's part of it. And, as we go into newer communities, on behalf of our work or organizations and things like that, sharing in an appropriate way with people that are new to you can often be an effective bridge building tool, but only as you are comfortable in doing so. when I teach and train people, whether it's the community resiliency model or other things, I tell people I'm an expert on Kevin McLeod. That's the only thing that I claim to be an expert on. I have some knowledge about some other things, but I'm an expert on me and my life. And I use stories about myself and my family and my friends to bring the concepts across and help people connect with the information. But, only, the types of things that are appropriate. Tijana or Tijana, hopefully I did not mess that up too bad. Surprising, I haven't thought much about parts of my identity I'm least aware of. I'm thinking about this and how it could be used in the context of our discussions. Yes, just having these thoughts, having this self-awareness is very important. Becky says, we talked about the difference between being misunderstood versus othered. Yes, those are two distinct things. I wish we had more time. I would ask you to jump into that. Lisa thanks Anna, Nao, and Guy. Ellen agrees with Tim that they were able to enjoy each other's story. Sonia says it's energizing to share and gain awareness with Rochelle and Lewis. Interesting to see how change happens over time and place, and that our identities are shaped by where we are. Very, very important. It's important to know how your identities are shaped. It's important to know how your perspective is shaped. In a little while, I'm going to start talking about bias, but it's also important to know how our own bias is shaped as well. Lisa says, we wondered if many people understood the same for 4, the most misunderstood, and 5 most difficult to talk about. Yeah, that is a good question. Do people understand, the difference between those questions? No, we wonder if many people answered the same for 4, most misunderstood, and 5 most difficult to talk about. Good question. All right. Well, thank you all once again for that. So I'm going to, after that activity, I now want to just have you for a moment, and we're going to do this with our, just with yourself. For a moment, I invite you to pull out your cell phone and scroll to your favorite appropriate picture in your phone. It's going to take about a minute to do this. So pull out your phone and scroll to your favorite appropriate picture in your phone. And as you get to that picture, just think about, who's in that picture or what's in that picture. What was going on in that moment? For me, I'm looking at a picture of my wife and me. And we're just kind of hanging out. And as I look at that picture, I'm just noticing what's happening on the inside. In my picture, we were sitting outside. There's a tree behind us, and I can see little flowers starting to bloom on the tree. And as I tell you all about that, I'm noticing just a lightness in my chest. And it's a pleasant lightness. It's not heavy. Just a pleasant lightness in my chest as I look at this picture of my wife and me just chilling outside. And so as we bring this to a close, just know that you can access your favorite appropriate pictures anytime you need to. If you run into a difficult moment or a situation, just know you can take a moment, pull out that picture, think about, who's in that picture, what's in that picture, what you were doing. Just those 3 or 4 additional details. and use that, and you can override some of the stress that you may be experiencing in that moment. Thank you. So as we go on this journey together and we think about, work around equity, diversity, and inclusion, work around, the work it takes to go from otherness to us, knowing that we all have access to the language of our biology and a framework to help understand the human experience is, this is great. It's freeing to me. What does this mean? So when we're talking about interventions and skills that promote equity, looking at, the inner wisdom of our bodies and nervous systems, this is in reach for everyone. We can teach anyone from any community these skills, the presencing skills, and just to notice, the change when they use these skills, especially communities that people have to be resilient. They have to constantly exhibit their resilience, and just bringing it to their attention. And I like using the presencing skills or the wellness skills, because these are things that people already do at times. It's just bringing it to their awareness so that they can do it intentionally to increase and enhance their well-being. And so some guiding thoughts, regarding this work, just understanding the lived experience through the trauma lens, and then ultimately through wellness and resilience. Understanding that people and communities have stories, just like you all have stories now, and you may be more aware of some of the stories that are related to your identities. We want to cultivate awareness around the amount of biological dysregulation that occurs as a result of those lived experiences. We want to share wellness and resiliency skills that can be cultivated within community. And this can be done for children and adults. I think it's wonderful that each week on these calls, there's resiliency pauses, there's wellness pauses for you to practice skills, for you to, bring your nervous system back into balance. And these things can be weaved into activities of daily living. And ultimately, we want to promote compassionate dialogue, continuous learning, and reflection. This is a journey. So we want to have that compassionate dialogue, especially across difference. We want to acknowledge our differences. And we also want to, keep in mind, the things that bind us as a world community. Common humanity are the words that come to mind for me. And now I'm going to transition into another important topic: implicit bias. And this is referred to the attitudes, stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And they're activated involuntarily without an individual's awareness or intentional control. This is different than the biases that we're aware of. So I'll go to other words that do not need to be used interchangeably. So you have bias, prejudice, discrimination, and racism. And bias is just what we talked about the slide before, just those unconscious thoughts that we have that influence our attitudes or our behaviors, things like that. Prejudice is to prejudge something. Literally, you just prejudge and you form an opinion, and you're thinking about this. Discrimination is when you take bias or prejudice and you add action into the mix. So you've othered someone at this point and you are excluding them, or you are just intentionally separating from that, person or group. Racism is discrimination at scale against a people group. So there are examples throughout world history, throughout the history of the United States, where their racism was at play. The institution of slavery was racism. The Holocaust was driven by racism. The the incarceration of Asian Americans during World War II was racism. Things done at scale against people groups are racism. And we don't want to get discrimination and racism mixed up, because it takes away from the how big, evil, and terrible racism is. The history of Native American peoples and the United States, full of rampant racism, that sort of thing. But I'm going to go back to bias really quickly, and I'm going to tell you a quick story. And I know that I've got about 5 minutes to to wrap up. But there's a lady, her name is Verna A. Myers, and Verna Myers is the VP of Inclusion Strategy at Netflix. And she's got a book called Moving Diversity Forward. It's an excellent book for people that want to bring this type of work forward. And I think she's a Harvard educated lawyer by trade, and she would go into large companies and help them on matters of equity, diversity, and inclusion. She would lead training. She would consult with the higher ups in organizations to get them to, institute policies and things of that nature that would help them to improve their efforts. And she was talking about her work and how she would fly all the time in this story. And in one particular flight, she noticed that there was a female pilot, and she was really excited and went on about her trip. And then at some point in the trip, the plane they experienced turbulence, and her first thought was, oh, I hope she can handle this plane. And then goes about the trip, lands, everything is safely, she was fine. And then on the way back, it's a male pilot, same old. She's used to having male pilots going from place to place traveling. And they hit a pocket of turbulence on the way back. And at that point, she realized what had happened. When they hit turbulence and there was a female pilot, her first inclination or her implicit bias said, oh, I hope she can handle this plane. Whereas when they hit the pocket of turbulence with the male pilot, at no point did she question his ability to handle the plane. And she noticed her own implicit bias in that moment. And I will tell you, she's someone that does this work. I'm someone that I do this work. Implicit bias is well within all of us. And I need people to understand that. This isn't the type of discussion, this isn't the type of training or session that, oh, I'm going to get rid of my implicit bias by going here. No, you have implicit bias. So what you have to do is use your explicit beliefs, use your explicit information that you have, use that to check your implicit bias. And in the example of Verna A. Myers, she knew that, okay, in order to be a pilot, you have to go through thousands of hours of training and have certain experiences and do all this work and apply yourself in certain ways. So of course, the pilot that was a female, of course she could handle the plane as it was going through turbulence. Of course she should, just in the same way that the male pilot could. So going forward, how would she then check that in herself? And so what these activities are designed to do is to help you learn about yourself and to help you challenge your own assumptions and to use your explicit beliefs to challenge your automatic responses and assumption, for you to explore, within yourself. And then outwardly, you can take this up and explore within your organization or within your circles the same types of things. Are we using our explicit beliefs to check our bias? Are our actions falling in line with our explicitly stated values? And those are good questions to catch whether or not, your bias is winning the day or not. I'm going to move on. Structural racism. I'm going to stay on the top bullet point in this description provided by the Aspen Institute. And it's just a system in which public policies, institutional practices, and cultural representations and other norms work in various reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed advantages associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. That's what I will say. I'll leave you with that. These have endured and adapted over time. And so by taking small steps to make sure that our explicit values line up with our behaviors, to make sure that we're checking our bias and making sure that we know the female pilot can fly the plane as well as the male pilot, to know that we aren't othering people based on their identities. That'll help moving the needle in some of these larger situations. And so there's a human toll on multiple experiences with discrimination and racism. You can look at it from a historical lens, a structural lens, and look at things like redlining and how do we get certain places and communities, and how other communities were not invested in, as compared to other parts of town and things like that. So if you go back to the equity and the slide that describes equity and justice, what types of structural things have occurred to put us where we are? Then you look at institutional racism. You can go across sector where there's education, finance, health, and wellness. There's discrimination and racism that exists in all of these institutions, and they've all got lots of work to do. Chronic experiences, what communities are you going to go into that have chronic experiences with discrimination and racism? And how have recent events taken a toll in those communities? But ultimately, we can focus on who or what is getting people through. Know that bias and behaviors can change, and that these behaviors can be unlearned, and that the resilient skills are going to help us in monitoring and identifying our own behaviors and biases, and knowing that even if we encounter some discomfort, we can use some of our presencing skills to turn the volume down on some of that discomfort and dysregulation, so that we can ultimately move forward and go toward change. And I'm going to just skip this next slide. This is just another resiliency pause, but I am going to leave you with this quote. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So I'm glad that I have the presencing skills to help me understand that I have purposing skills, and I need to do this work and continue on with this work. And thank you all. And I'm turning it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Kevin. That was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I know everybody, I'm sure everybody feels the same way. Kevin's slides and the few that I showed at the start will be available on the website, the web page that we've created for the training program in a few days, well, along with the recording of the session and all the comments and chat. So, and you'll get an email about that soon. I want to ask you all to please remember to fill out the evaluation form. If you can't do it now before you leave, please try to do it. We'll send you another link to it in a day or two. Try and do it then, because again, we're trying to learn from all of you how to continue to improve our sessions. Although I think the only way we can improve on Kevin's sessions to make it for 3 or 4 hours. But other than that, we really want to know what you thought about it and any suggestions you have. In the slides that that will be posted that I presented, at the end of those slides, there's one page of resources, as we're doing with every session, books and manuals, etc. So please take a look at that before you, if you want to know more information. And also, remind you that next week, Dr. Sandra Bloom is going to join us. She's the founder of the sanctuary model, and it's really, we'll focus more in on how to facilitate our Resilience Coordinating Council. Kevin has really helped us understand that becoming aware of our implicit biases and our identity markers is really important when we work with diverse groups, to help us work with and help these groups come together and work for the benefit of everyone. Dr. Sandy Bloom's going to talk about how to resolve conflicts. and really develop safety and trust among people who don't know each other, don't work together often. So I would just remind you again to sign in or to pre-register ahead of time so you can get into the session. And with that, I want to thank Kevin again for a wonderful, wonderful presentation and wish you all a very good week. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you all. Take care. Thanks, Kevin.
Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.